I'm Nick Snow, watching Government for Oil and Gas Journal in Washington, D.C. Oil and gas groups did not respond immediately when the U.S. Supreme Court ruled on June 29th that the Environmental Protection Agency acted unreasonably when it said costs weren't relevant in regulating mercury and air toxics emissions from coal-fired power plants. But the decision potentially could affect other evolving EPA regulations which would apply to the oil and gas industry. EPA must consider cost, including cost of compliance, before deciding whether regulation is appropriate and necessary, the 5-4 decision on Michigan versus EPA said. It will be up to the agency to decide, as always, within the limits of reasonable interpretation, how to account for cost. Business organizations outside oil and gas said that the ruling matters. The Supreme Court upheld a fundamental precept of smart regulation today, that a rigorous cost-benefit analysis is a necessary component of any major regulatory proposal, Business Roundtable President John Engler maintained. The ruling establishes an important and valuable precedent for evaluating proposed and pending federal regulations, he said. Requiring agencies to weigh the economic costs of proposed regulations will lead to better rulemaking and fairer outcomes for businesses, workers, and families. U.S. Chamber of Commerce President Thomas J. Donahue said the court made it clear that EPA can't turn a blind eye when it imposes massive costs on the U.S. economy in return for minimal environmental benefits. The decision affirms the common sense principle that Congress requires agencies to consider the consequences of regulations they impose on businesses and consumers, he maintained. Today, the Supreme Court called out the EPA for a systematic problem, failure to appropriately consider costs that the agency has repeatedly used to issue overly aggressive regulations that place manufacturers at a competitive disadvantage. National Association of Manufacturers Senior Vice President and General Counsel Linda Kelly said on June 29th. Manufacturers depend on affordable, reliable energy supplies to remain competitive and face other pending regulations, such as stricter ozone and greenhouse gas limits, which will impose further burdens, she explained. We need a balanced approach to regulations that considers both costs and benefits to continue to create jobs and economic growth, Kelly said. The American Petroleum Institute has warned that EPA's proposal to reduce national ambient air quality standards to 65 parts per billion came as several U.S. metropolitan areas were having trouble meeting the current 70 parts per billion limit. It said that a recent NERA economic consulting study found a stricter ozone regulation could reduce U.S. gross domestic product by $270 billion a year and $3.4 trillion from 2017 to 2040, and result in 2.9 million fewer jobs or job equivalents annually on average through 2040. Those seem like potential costs EPA may need to consider now. That's Watching Government for this week. In Washington, I'm Nick Snow for Oil and Gas Journal.